do that. And we are recording, is that correct?
I believe so. I see on my end it is recording.
All right, great.
No.
We will start in about 3 minutes, 3 to 5 minutes. Annie, can you hear me?
Yes, Jane, I hear you.
Okay, hi everyone. Just give it one more minute. We've just hit 12 o'clock. One more minute and we will make a start. Thank you for joining us. Okay, Connie, let's make a start. Good morning, everyone, or good afternoon, depending on where you are in the world. Thank you very much for joining us. Today is our monthly webinar from Churchill Leadership Group. We do these webinars each month with a different topic. The purpose is to educate you, give you tips and practical solutions that you can take away straight away, but also to open your mind to what's going on in your organization and where you can make positive change and how Churchill might be able to help you when you are ready for expert support. So today our focus is going to be on high impact communication. Let's start with really why we're talking about this. High impact communication. 9 out of 10 conversations miss the mark. That doesn't mean they completely fail, but they're not as effective as they could be. That's 90% of conversations that are going on in your organization miss the mark. MIT research also found out that there's a 50% of the difference in the performance between a low and a high performing team is again the quality of their conversations. So this massive volume of opportunity for greater performance is in that area of communication. So that is why we're doing several webinars on this leadership topic. Before we move into specifics, just to give some context for those of you that don't already know Churchill, we are a global organization. We founded back in 8 years ago now, because we believe there's so much untapped talent in the corporate and government world that can be harnessed to improve engagement, growth of your people, your leaders and your employees, and therefore improve performance. We focus on the soft skills. We're not teaching you anything about technology or anything like that. And we do it through a methodology of focusing on strengths. We operate globally in these areas, USA, Canada, Europe and the Middle East, Latin America, and Asia Pacific. And our goal is to build a global team to partner with you when you need that global or local footprint. We cover 3 areas. If you are trying to make change at a whole organizational level, globally or locally, things like culture, engagement, building a coaching culture maybe, increasing trust, those type of things at that high level. We also do leadership development, which is executive coaching, leadership development programs, manager effectiveness programs, and of course a variety of programs that help you improve the performance of your teams. And there are over 200 of us, executive coaches, consultants, trainers, and facilitators, all of which have extensive personal leadership experience to bring to you, as well as their training. Here's a snapshot of our clients. I know a lot of you today are from the technology or the finance area. A lot of our clients are in that space, and we've been partnering with them for many years, as well as healthcare and other industries. What you see on the logos is just a snapshot. My background is I learned to coach over 20 years ago. I'm a certified executive coach. Some of my specialties, in addition to strengths and team performance, are communication with conversational intelligence and brief. Most of my role now is running the company, so I get to use my coaching skills in everyday conversations with our coaching team, Churchill's leadership team, and of course our clients. The great work is done by those 200 coaches. All right, a little about my experience in the space of communication. I don't have all the answers, but I've learned a lot and I continue to learn. A lot has been through my experience, 23 years working as a corporate leader, both in EMEA and the US, as well as the last 8 years at Churchill has learned me a lot through experience, practice, and training of what great communication looks like. I also have those certifications in brief, which is about being clear, concise, and compelling, and conversational intelligence. I also, and this is really valuable for me and our Churchill team, I get to observe globally the needs of our many clients and the challenges they face and what works for them. So I bring that experience to you today on this webinar. We also have with us our leadership team member here at Churchill, Dr. Connie Evans. Connie, could you introduce yourself, please?
Hi there. Thanks, Jane, for having us, or having me, rather. I'm excited to learn what you're going to present to us today on high impact communication, and I'm excited to learn.
Thank you, Connie. Connie will also help us manage the chat and the polls and any interactions. So feel free to put your thoughts, questions in the chat. Connie's going to keep a close eye on that because I am a terrible multitasker. Thank you, Connie. All right. Let's look at the agenda of what we're going to try to complete in the next sort of 45, 50 minutes. We want to help you as leaders on this call and for you to then go back to your leaders and teams in your organization to help them be clearer, more concise, and more compelling. That's huge. That's a huge sort of topic in itself as being part of communication, but hopefully we'll make some progress that is valuable to you. We've already talked about why we're here. 9 out of 10 conversations we have missed the mark. They can be better. And by being better, we can move execution of your business forward and perform better and grow more by having better conversations. It's a huge number, 90%. We also know that teams that have better conversations with each other and across teams with their stakeholders and customers improve performance. That's why we're here. I'm going to focus on 3 types of challenges when it comes to communications and the risks and consequences of them. And we would love your input in terms of what you're seeing in your organization and your world. I'm going to focus on one of those 3, the over-communicating piece, and that challenge, and offer you some solutions and tips you can use straight away. And we'll wrap up with how Churchill might be able to help you. So let's start with hearing from you, our audience. What are some of your current communication challenges? Please type a few words, all of you, into the chat box, and we'll ask Connie to summarize those.
How about knowing how to tailor different techniques to different types of people?
Yeah, individualizing it to your audience. Yep.
The time to convey the entirety of the message.
Yeah, that's a big one. We'll certainly touch on that today. Thank you.
I thought I said one thing, but it was heard so much differently.
Yeah, I know growing up in the UK, we used to play a game called Chinese Whispers, and that reminds me of that, right? You say one thing and yeah, that's not what I said, but it's amazing how someone heard it that way. So the clarification is really key. All right. Anything else before I move on?
One more. We've got clear and concise communications to executive leaders when dealing with touchy or complex subjects.
Yes. That feels like it's every day sometimes, right? There's so many complex topics, and as a leader, that's why the organization needs us to deal with this complexity. So thank you so much. Connie will keep an eye on any more chat that comes in. What I'm sharing here are just some of the requests we've had in the last couple of months from clients where they need our help with communication. So I'm just going to give you a moment to read this. And it really is a sample of what we've heard for years, these similar types of things. So communication, when I think of it visually, is this whole umbrella of a leadership skill. It incorporates lots of different areas of communication, presentation skills, how to be not too assertive, but assertive enough, how to be clear when I present so people hear what I'm saying, how to understand my audience, how to individualize my message, how to have that tough conversation, courageous conversation. There's so many pieces to it. So when I saw the picture of this umbrella, that's what it reminded me of. It's truly an umbrella skill that we all need. And no surprise, sharing a quote here from one of the leaders I admire, Winston Churchill, the true difference between a manager and leadership, influence, is communication. Challenge is no one teaches us how to communicate. We learn how to talk very early on, and we learn English at school, and we might get some training, but truly how to influence with impact is something most of us don't get trained to do, but we can learn that. We can learn that from training, coaching, and on-the-job experience. So because we're dealing with this huge umbrella, what I've done is broken it down to 3 of the many topics. What happens when we over-communicate and how we can solve for that? What happens when we under-communicate? We won't go deep on that, but we'll touch on it. That could be a series of webinars all on its own. And how we communicate when we get the volume right. Let's review each in a little more detail, and for each one, I'll ask you what you're experiencing at your organization. Over-communicate. When we inundate people with information, not intentionally, but we're not coming across with the clarity and the impact that we need. Where do we see that at Churchill? Well, we see it a lot with senior leaders in more of a command and control environment, where they feel they have to have the answers, they have to give all of the direction, and they do all the talking. I did a workshop not long ago with a big group of CEOs, and we talked about conversational intelligence and communication in general, and I asked them a simple question. Reflect on your team meetings. What % of the talking do you do? And they came back with 70 to 90%. They said it was exhausting for them, but they felt that was part of their role. But the challenge was it wasn't working for them. They wanted to hear the ideas within their team. They wanted innovation. They didn't want to have all the answers because they knew it was impossible. But they got into this rut of over-communicating. Maybe some of you see that. Often we get asked to do executive coaching with leaders like this where their teams don't feel heard and they're not as engaged as they could be. I grew up in the world of sales, and I'm always observing salespeople and sales leaders and the challenges that they face. And often salespeople, through pure enthusiasm, do too much talking. It can be sales from a call center, it can be sales in person, it can be through email. And we're not listening to the unique individual customer's need. And we overwhelm them with features, and the sale really doesn't move forward. We also see it a lot with middle managers or project teams presenting up to stakeholders or senior leaders. Often we hear senior leaders say, don't bring that leader in again and present to me, it was a waste of my time, or they give us so much information but I'm not really clear what they're asking us to do, I don't get the point. So again, helping managers be able to communicate more clearly to their teams but also to senior leaders. And finally, that email. We've worked with a few clients recently where they've given us samples of email communications where it's just overwhelming and they just want to stop that. How do we either stop using email to communicate when things get more complex and find better ways of doing it? So that's still a challenge even with lots of technology alternatives. So what do you see? Let me come to that in a moment. I'm going to give you a little more context. Why is over-communicating a problem for us and we need to stop it? We need to find a better way. Well, now, this year, last year, the last couple of years, we're inundated in information. We consume 100,000 words per day through different channels, emails, conversations, meetings, articles, web. We receive over 300 emails a week. I think I receive more than that. And the problem is our brains can't keep up. We're human. We're human. What our grandparents, our grandfather 100 years ago took in terms of information in 1 year, we consume in 1 day. That's how much it's changed. So our attention span has been reduced. We abandon complex emails in 30 seconds if they're complex and don't get straight to the point. And we tune out of someone presenting to us within 1 minute if we don't see clarity. So we're inundated, and these are some of the consequences. So we have to be clearer and more concise and get to the point. So what are you seeing in your organization, specifically in this space of over-communication and confusion? Let's hear through the chat box, please.
Lauren says, I only think the team understands a small fraction of what comes in emails.
I'm curious, Lauren, why you think that is.
Because she cannot digest them herself.
Right? I'm right there with you. I get emails and I'm like, okay, I'll come back to that because it's a lot of information. I don't know where to start. I don't know what to do. So yeah, we have to get teams, leaders that are sending out these emails all on the same page of how do we get to the point. Hopefully you'll be able to take some tips with you. Anything else?
Yeah, Julie says there's just not enough bandwidth.
Yeah. Absolutely inundated. And one of the exercises we do with teams is what do we stop doing? What do you stop doing as a team? What do you want people around you to stop doing? And no surprise, you probably can imagine some of the responses. Too many emails from above, too lengthy emails, differing priorities from my boss and my functional boss, and my team member has a different boss, and we're all pulled in different directions. There's lack of clarity. Yeah.
Great. And then we have Brian saying that inundation, as you said, everyone is being asked to consume too much, too fast, too often.
Yeah. And you don't get the best of us, right? I do tons of yoga. Those of you that know me well, I do tons of yoga to keep sane, I think sometimes. It also helps me keep clear. And I often find myself leaving a yoga studio thinking, what are my top three? And I use a top three rule all the time. What are the three most important, most urgent things I need to get done today? If I do nothing else, what are those? If I have an hour spare on my calendar, what are the three things I need to think about? I have to keep it to top three, most important, most urgent, because we're all inundated. So there's a little tip. But that doesn't stop other people throwing everything in the kitchen sink at us. So often this is an organizational, cultural issue, and we have to start at the top. All right. So let me just reinforce this over communication. Maybe most of you have felt like this. I certainly have. People need clarity over certainty. I've been in many organizations as a leader and employee where there have been mergers, downsizing, acquisitions, organizational restructures. And I'm sure many of you have experienced that as well. During those times of change, we can never give employees certainty. We can't give them all the answers because we don't have them. We're working through ambiguity, but we can give them clarity. We don't know this yet, and this is why. We might know this in about 4 weeks. This is what we do know right now. This is what we can act on. So we can have clarity even if we don't need certainty. And it's critical because when our teams and employees are confused, it is the number one productivity killer because confused minds do nothing. They freeze. They go back to mundane work that they think they can control and aren't dealing with the most important things you need them to deal with. So clarity in communication is key. And over communication causes confusion. So that's topic number one of the three. Let's move to number two. We'll be a bit quicker on this one. Under communicating. What do you see there? What do you see at your organization when people under communicate? What are they under communicating and what are some of the consequences? Please type in chat.
Bullets without context.
Oh, I'm wondering if I'm a victim, if I'm guilty of that sometimes. That's a good one. I'm going to take a note to self, look in the mirror. Bullets without context. Thank you. Anything else? Okay,
I think that's it.
Okay, so here's some of the things that we see from Churchill globally. Managers not spending the time with their employees. That might be they're not doing regular team meetings, they're not doing regular one-on-ones, they cancel one-on-ones, and that can be quite disconcerting to the employee because the employee feels, oh, I'm not that important, really. It can be they're not giving them feedback. Leaders and project teams leave meetings and think everyone on the team is aligned on what we've agreed on and what we need to do, and yet then become disappointed when we get together again and some things haven't been done. It's because we neglect to follow up. Even if someone nods or says yes in a meeting, we cannot assume that we're on the same page. Like I think Lauren said earlier, I've said something, but that's not what someone heard. Culturally, if people nod in some parts of the word, it doesn't mean, yes, I've got it, I'll do it. It just means I've heard what you've said. I may not agree. I might think what you've said is a load of nonsense, but we have to follow up. So that's another example of where we see under communication. It's part of commitment and accountability is in there as well. We avoid those difficult conversations. We may put them off. A perfect example we hear this time of year is when a manager hasn't given more constructive feedback to their employee, and come end of year performance management conversation, the employee is shocked because they're hearing it for the first time, and this has been going on for several months, and their manager hasn't given them the respect of sharing it with them in the moment when it happened. So we avoid that because they're difficult and we don't know how to have those type of conversations. And we don't give feedback at all, positive or constructive. So these are probably the most common areas, and a lot of this comes under leadership development and manager effectiveness. So let me tell you a quick story. This is Charlie and Sonia. Sonia was a high potential leader in her organization, middle manager, did very, very well in her previous roles in terms of her leadership growth and performance. She had high engagement scores for her teams. She was promoted into a different department, and her new boss was Charlie. One of the reasons Sonia always said that she grew was she got time with her previous managers. They gave her clarity, they challenged her thinking, they coached her and gave her feedback. When she moved into this new world with Charlie, they got on great. The conversations they had in the hallway, in the interview process, in just like the water cooler, those type of conversations, they get on like a house on fire. However, Charlie never had regular one-on-ones with her. When she tried to find time on his calendar, he was always so busy traveling or in meetings. And slowly, she just was a little confused of what was expected of her, what her priorities should be, and she couldn't get clarity. Sonia was a really capable leader and found other ways through mentoring and through speaking to others and the little time she had with her boss. But over time, Sonia began to wane. She became less engaged. She really needed to be challenged as a high top performer, and Charlie just wasn't giving her that attention. Here was a top high-po performer on the radar of HR as a future leader in the organization, but because of this, Sonia left and went to a competitor organization. During her exit interview, she clearly stated, my time wasn't important enough to spend with my boss. He couldn't find the time to give me what I needed. I need to go find it elsewhere. Maybe some of you have experienced that if you're in HR. Maybe some of you have experienced that in fellow leaders. We have to communicate enough to give our employees what we need. And so this is often where we need to start at the top as an organization to challenge and help our direct reports grow and give them what they need and individualize it, and also at a first line manager level. It's critical to engage, grow, and retain our people leaders. People feel ignored, taken for granted, and while they'll join a great organization, they will leave because they don't feel appreciated and get what they need. How is this resonating in your organization? Any thoughts you'd like to share on chat?
Yeah, Lauren says that that is a wake-up call.
Great, great. If you have any questions or we can help you further on that, Lauren, on this webinar or beyond, please, that's a big part of these webinars, is to get you to slow down and think within that inundated busy day, is to get you to think of better ways to move forward. All right, the third bucket is how we communicate. Let's assume we get the volume right. We're not over communicating and causing confusion. We're not under communicating. We're not done then, because how we communicate can cause us challenges. How we speak to each other and the words we use can improve trust and connect us, or it can reduce trust and separate us. Challenges in the moment we may not know. Words we use create the worlds in which we operate. And that's key. So on the webinar that we do next month, we're going to talk about the neuroscience and what happens when we talk to each other. Most of us, through no sort of malicious intent, are very focused on getting done what we need to get done and what our boss needs us to do and what our priorities are. We're highly responsible and accountable. That can lead to what I need on this team, what I need resources for my team, my organization. And that doesn't help an organization. We have to take the I hat off and think we. So we'll talk about that as well. Consequence of this is it can reduce trust. One of the challenges on top of this is diverse cultures. Just twice, I think in the last few weeks, I've heard people in Europe, Germany, Scandinavia struggling to get their point across to people in the US. Same between the US and Asia. And so these diversity of cultures exist, diversity exists. How do we learn in conversations to include and value that diversity and make it work for us? So we can communicate in a way that builds trust instead of helps us feel not heard, not understood. Also, the virtual teams of global locations can get in our way. So join us next month to talk more about that, because all of that causes us to make wrong assumptions, makes us over-assert or back down because someone else is being too assertive, and therefore we're no longer operating as a collaborative team. We struggle not being able to communicate our priorities and agree on what are the joint priorities. The cross cultures we've mentioned, and that ultimately can lead to conflict and avoidance, or just making our work really difficult and less enjoyable. Now we're going to get into the tips, but before we do that, I'm going to ask you to do a reflection exercise. Everyone on this webinar has a ton of experience, so what I'm going to ask you to do is think about a leader in your organization who you believe does have excellent communication skills. What did they do, or what do they do that stands out for you when it comes to communicating? And as part of that, how do they give clarity to others through their communication? I'm going to give you at least a minute. I'm going to use my phone to time that, to collect your thoughts and share a couple of bullets. We're focusing on what's right with great communicators here. So let's see what you observe. All right, my time is on.
Okay, from Elena, we've got open and clear communication, honest, isn't afraid to say they don't know all the answers, and they can be vulnerable.
Yes. Oh, I love to hear. Thank you, Alina. The word vulnerable in leaders, so key. If any of you have done trust work with executives, you'll know vulnerability is a big part of that conversation. We don't have to have all the answers because we're human, and we have teams to help us get to the answers. That's the beauty of having a team. We can take the pressure off. So leaders that are vulnerable and need help and need your input, huge. Signaling the timer. Anything else that we're hearing, Connie?
Yeah, from Brian, he says, clarity with context quickly and from a servant's heart.
Servant leadership, love that. Yep, let's get straight to the point because we're inundated.
And Ron says they are consistent in terms of regular communication and clear with messaging. They actually prepare key messaging talking points to help ensure messages are clear.
Excellent. There's a cadence there, that regularity. I know some of our clients have those Monday morning stand-ups or Monday morning team webinar, might be only 15 to 20 minutes where they prioritize what they need to focus on that week, get any top of mind questions answered, and they feel energized to move forward. There's lots of ways to build a great cadence to communication with your teams. Thank you for that. So I'm going to share 3 helpful tips, and then I'm going to sort of like pull it all together. And I think I've a story as well we'll have time for. So some of these tips you might like, yeah, that's pretty obvious. I want you to keep this in mind. Just because you and I know this is important doesn't mean we're doing it consistently well. Common knowledge is not common practice. We often see that with executives when we do leadership programs across organizations. They're like, yeah, we don't need it. Go do it with our leaders, go do it with our directors and our managers. Whereas the managers and directors are saying, our execs need it too, right? Just because the execs know it, and they do, doesn't mean they're doing it. So keep that in mind. Common knowledge is not common practice. So the first tip is start with the end in mind. Prepare. And it doesn't mean you have to prepare for hours. Here's a simple example. I'm going into this conversation with Connie, and Connie and I need to focus on prioritizing how we will help customer A. When I leave that conversation with Connie, what do we need to have achieved? What is a good outcome? And then I might think of 1 or 2 things. That then will guide me as I prepare to have the conversation with Connie. Start with the end in mind to prioritize and get clarity. You can do that with presentations. You can do that with one-on-ones with your team. You can do it going into meetings. Second one is stay curious. For those of you that have done our Leader as Great Coach program, you'll know that as a coach, a leader needs to stay curious. Why? Because we are not mind readers. It's really that simple. We need to be able to put ourselves in other people's shoes, and we can't do that without asking, without staying curious and not making assumptions. We teach you how to do that in our Leader as Great Coach program, and here are some tips. One way to stay curious is to ask powerful questions, questions for which you don't have answers. You don't know the answer. They're not leading questions. They are powerful. Here are some examples. I'll give you a moment to read and take any notes. All right. So put yourself in the other person's shoes in which you're in the conversation with, and stay curious to make sure their thoughts, ideas, concerns, goals are out on the table as well. Then it goes from I to we. The third tip is get to the point fast. I think a few of you have talked about this. So here's the shift in the world from a few decades ago to today. We used to be able to tell a story and get to the end point, give lots of information, and then end with, this is what we need to do and this is why. Ladies, gentlemen, those days are gone. You can feel it yourself, and those around you feel the inundation we've been talking about. We need to get straight to the point. This is why we're here. This is what we're going to talk about. This is what we need to do. Then give context as people need it. Here's a story. Oh, let me show you how to bring all this together first. So I tried to put this in an acronym for clients. Not sure I love the first word of this acronym, dramatic, but I needed a D to make it something easy you can remember. The acronym is DREAM. It gives you 5 steps to think about as you're preparing to be clear, concise, and compelling. Get their attention with a high impact phrase or fact. Notice how I started the conversation with 9 out of 10 conversations missed the mark, and 50% of the reason why high performing teams are better than low performing is the quality of their conversations. Straight to the point, pretty dramatic numbers. Get to the point to get your audience that is already very distracted into the conversation with you. Make it relevant for them. Why are we talking about this? What are you going through? Connect the dots with what you need and what we're talking about. Make it relevant for your audience. Educate them, give them a couple of facts, not War and Peace, a couple of facts that they may not know that really helps them, bring them along to help them move forward on the subject that you're talking about. Related to get them moving, CTA's call to action. We need typically to do something, that's why we're having the conversation, so give them facts that are likely to get them to want to move. Ask, you're not in the conversation one way, you need their input. What's going through their mind right now? Tell me what you're thinking about what I've shared. What are some of the challenges that I haven't considered? What's going on in your world that we need to hear about to make this relevant for you? Ask a couple of prepared, powerful questions that are simple to get their input so that you're not making assumptions. And the final one is that move to action, whether you're in a one-on-one or a presentation or in a conversation with your boss. Summarize what you think you've heard, what you think we're agreeing to double check in case you've misheard, and agree on next steps. So there's a degree of collective commitment and accountability. We teach this with leaders and teams, going into a lot more detail, but hopefully this at this high level can help you as you leave this webinar to be clearer and have greater communication impact without giving tons of information. Any thoughts on how this might help you or a reaction to this? Please pop it in a chat box. And then I'll tell you a quick story.
Jane, this is my own personal question. How do you not come across as curt or rude when you're trying to streamline the information you're putting out?
Yeah, right. That's a really great question. So well, let me ask you first as a coach, Connie, what goes through your mind when you think about that question? How would you put yourself first?
I think I don't want to offend the other person, but make sure that I'm still being heard appropriately. So trying to find that balance.
Yeah. So that's your reason why, right? You don't want to hurt people, and I think that's a big reason why people worry about being too assertive or just getting straight to the point is might be offended, and that's real, right? Some people might be and have a very different style. If someone's so used to giving lots of information first and getting to the point is very different to their style, yeah, that might be a transition. What might you try, Connie, to prevent hurting someone's feeling but still being clear and concise?
Is it okay to give them a heads up to say, hey, I'm trying a new method of communicating and I just want to streamline the process so that they have a roadmap for why you're doing what you're doing?
Absolutely. Absolutely. If you're making a change in your communication approach and you know your audience, saying like, normally I come in with a lot of information. I know that we often run out of time or don't get, maybe people in the room don't feel heard because we do run out of time. So I'm going to try a different approach. Definitely in a couple of minutes, we're going to give a chance for everyone to contribute and be heard and understood. But first of all, I just want to share a couple of things and then just get into those first couple of bullet points. Yeah. I would add to that how well you know your audience. I would add to it to say, okay, this is what I'm going to do in the next few minutes. I'm going to get straight to the point and talk about what we need to talk about and why it's relevant to you. Then I'm going to slow down and let us all get into the conversation and then have a collaborative solution discussion before we end on the action items. So if you need to soften it that way to give context, absolutely. All I would ask you is try, learn, adjust.
Perfect. Thank you.
You're welcome. You're welcome. So here's a story. Context on this story is the lady on the screen. It's not her real picture. She gave me permission to share this story with confidentiality. She was a senior IT executive working in the US. She was from Europe, from a European country. Her boss was a CTO. He also was based in the US, working globally from the same European country. So they had similar cultural commonalities. They'd been working together for about a year, so they sort of knew each other. The CTO, the boss, was very, very busy. And this individual, let's call her Jane for confidentiality, needed budget approval on a major global project. She came to us for executive coaching, and she had tried several times to go to the budget meeting with her boss and peers to get budget approval, and either the answer was no or a decision couldn't be made. She was struggling with this. She was worried about her credibility to be influential. She was worried about her project and all the people reliant on her in a project, that she couldn't give them the certainty of budget approval. So we worked together to determine a different approach. Well, what we discovered was the approach she had been taking was more of the left approach, sharing lots of information, and then at the end, getting to the point. Well, time tended to run out, and by the time she got to the point, she'd lost her audience. And so she started to realize what was causing her to do that. And what she discovered was it was more about her personal need to have all the answers than it was about her audience. It was about I and not we. So she started to practice in the safety of executive coaching a different approach. What if I turned that triangle upside down and changed what I did? What if I got straight to the point, made this relevant in a clear, concise manner, asked for what we needed and why, talked about the benefits and the risk if we don't approve budget, and then allowed questions where I have this whole lot of information expertise in my back pocket ready to go. She got budget approval in less than 2 minutes when she tried this at the meeting. She was more shocked than anyone. All she did was turn the triangle upside down. She recognized what her audience needed versus what her comfort level needed. She changed the game and was able to do that on a regular basis and be perceived in a much more influential way as a leader. I hope that illustrates the point of one of those key tips. Final thoughts and questions. Let me take a time check here. We are at 45 minutes past. Any final questions from the audience? Feel free to use the chat. Feel free to come off mute and talk to us.
Elena asks, how do you make changes to the way your company communicates that are sustainable over time?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's also a big question, Elena. It depends on the change you want to make. And I think that in itself is a big part of the program typically we do with a client. So here's a couple of thoughts. When we work with a client, what we typically do is think about who are the stakeholders and sponsors of this change? Who are the people usually at the top that feel this is a need? And work with them, and this is where we use our coaching skills to help them think through and go deeper in terms of what isn't working for you today, what needs to change, and what would good look like. So we all align at that senior level on what today looks like, the challenge, the consequences to the business and our people, what the future looks like if we make this change, and what do we think that change needs to be. That's really part of Change Management 101. And as such, I'm a certified change management expert, as are a lot of our coaches. Because when it comes to organizational change, you really need a change management around it to measure success and make sure all the pieces are in place. So for some organizations, that might mean, I was speaking to someone recently, we've changed our strategy, but I don't think everyone's on board, either with it being a good idea or understanding our strategy. So how can we execute on our strategy while that's in place? We need to make a change. So that might be the issue. It might be a trust issue. Very often when we hear communication issue and we double click with clients, we find out that their employees don't trust senior leaders. And that can mean for many different reasons. They're not bad people. The communication hasn't been good, and what they say isn't what they do, and trust has gone down. So it depends on the subject. Fine-tuning it to get to the specific need, and then putting strategies in place and measuring success. We might start with a pilot in a small scale to see how the change implementation for communication works, learn from it, and then deploy it at a more at a larger level. I hope that helps, Elena. If you have any follow-up questions, please shout out.
Ron would like to say, good insight and context. Thanks for the session.
You're welcome, Ron. You're welcome. Do any of you have a specific communication challenge you'd like to share on the chat box and have your peers that are with us today respond? That's what we mean by peer mastermind here on the slide. If you do, type in your challenge. We know you can only give a bit of information in the chat box, but if you type it as a how do we solve for XXX, feel free to do that. We'll give you a few seconds to see if anyone types anything. If not, we'll move on.
Do you see more miscommunication coming from the top or the front line?
Great question. We see a lot of miscommunication on the front line because it's confusing from the top. The two are connected, very much so. It's like I mentioned that game earlier, and I don't know if they call it something different in America or around the world, but I say a message to you, Connie, you say it to someone else, you say it to a third, fourth person, and the fourth, fifth person, if they shared with me what I said, I'd be like, that is nothing like what I said.
Yeah,
and so that's...
We call it telephone here.
Okay, that's the game, telephone game. All right, thank you. So the two are totally connected, and that's why any intervention communication to do really, really well across the organization has to start at the top. And it usually starts with strategy, our focus, our vision, our culture, and then getting clarity around that in terms of communication, our decisions, what that means to people, and aligning them. When I was in corporate, we used something called the balanced scorecard to help with that communication from top to bottom. And Churchill has certainly done that with organization, with clients. So there's lots of ways to do it, but it starts with getting clarity and alignment at the top. All right, doesn't look like there's a particular peer mastermind need, so I'm going to move on and we'll wrap up here. If you're an HR leader or a team leader in your organization and you need more help and want to talk about your specific need, happy to do that. Schedule 30 minutes with me to do that. Just type in the chat box, I want 30 minutes with Jane, and we'll follow up with you to get that done. Connie, before I share how Churchill can help the audience, any final thoughts you would like to share?
Sure. I think it's kind of the old adage, it's not what you say so much as how you say it. Very powerful to approach it with some actual thought and not just, have things come out of your mouth, but to have a purpose to what you're, like you said, keeping the end in mind.
Yeah. Absolutely. It's one of the reasons I get confused in meetings or when someone's talking to me is I have no idea why we're talking about this, the context. Where is it we're trying to get to? I have futuristic with strengths in my top 5. And so for me, I have to think of the big picture of why we're doing this. Where is it we're trying to get to? What is it we're trying to achieve first to be able to listen to the detail? And a lot of people are like that. And it's a great way to give clarity is start with the end in mind. Thank you for that reinforcement. There are multiple ways Churchill can help you with communication if and when you're ready for expert external support. We have a variety of communication related assessments, conversational intelligence, trust, DISC, I think we're all familiar with that, and a variety of other communication style assessments. That helps you get grounded on your baseline where your organization is, who you are as a leader, so that we can help build on that. Of course, a lot of need in executive coaching for senior executives or high potential leaders is around communication challenges, or we need them to be able to communicate in an even better way or on a bigger scale. So that's where executive coaching comes in. We do that as one-off needs or as a managed service to provide executive coaches around the globe to your organization. Then, of course, we can do that on scale for more middle or first line managers, team coaching, group coaching. And of course, we have our series of one-off or series of leadership and manager 101, 201, workshops, webinars, and learning journeys. So we can make whatever you need fit your unique need when it comes to communication. So if you need us, reach out. Thank you for joining today. We hope that what we shared with you was valuable. Join us next month when we get into how we communicate in terms of the words we use. As a conversational intelligence certified coach, I'll share a little of the neuroscience and we can talk more in depth. We're planning to do that October 30th at 12 p.m. Please join us. Bring your friends. We're going to put a poll on the screen just to get a feel of how valuable this was for us. For you, our audience, if you have anything further you want to share, pop your words in chat. And with that, wherever you joined us from around the world, Kanye and I would like to say thank you and see you next time. Take care and have a great rest of your week.